Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm talking to Tracey Saenz. Tracey is a marketing leader who has grown and turned around brands for over 20 years. She's launched challenger brands, created new product categories, and has expanded leading brands into new markets. And as a team leader, she has nurtured decade-long relationships with team members and agency partners. And that's what we're talking about today, how to maximize your investment when working with agency partners. And she is on a mission to provide strategy for David brands competing against Goliaths. Tracey, welcome back to the pod.
Thank you. Glad to be here. How are you?
Pretty solid, drinking an espresso from Nicaragua, and this is a light roast, but we'll see. We have a medium roast ready to go, and I'm getting into potentially roasting my own beans. So we'll see.
You're a man of many talents. I don't know how you find the time.
Oh, it is mostly an idea and a hobby, but I don't know if we're going to make it a reality just yet. So the subscription will continue. You've been on the pod. I think we chatted when? Was it 2019? It's been a couple years since
Maybe
that.
during COVID. I don't know. Yeah.
That's before or after. But all I know is that your focus on helping David brands compete against Goliaths has been no matter if you're doing yourself, if you're a CMO, if you're in the work that you're doing. But tell me more about like your personal journey, like you running the agency, you working in house, you working with other companies, like what's transpired since then and now?
Since I ran my own agency, I decided I really wanted to be part of a team again, rather than advising one. And as much as I wanted to act like an extension of the team as a consultant, I really wanted to just be part of the team and participate more in the company's success. So now I'm working at a company called Ender. It's a B2B software platform to help companies successfully do digital transformation. So I'm excited. And I think one of the reasons I've always tried to work with David brands competing against Goliaths is because there is a lot of latent innovation in the world, I believe. And I'm not necessarily a product person or an engineer, but if those innovations don't make it to market, the value will never be realized by the world. And so that's what I kind of see as the overlap of my skills and my passion and what the world needs is helping those innovations get to market. And often these startups or David brands, whether they're startups or not, they're just facing a lot of headwinds. So it takes a lot of maneuvering and strategy to get around and figure out the way that's going to get them successfully there. So I love that.
I'm pretty curious. It's a big challenge, and I'm really curious more about like some of the either headwinds or tailwinds that you're seeing right now with market shifts. I mean, since we last spoke, was I honestly think it might have been around 2020, either the months prior or the months after. But that's when we had the conversation here. And there was obviously different market economic situations, headwinds for many companies, tailwinds for some of the companies that I was seeing online. Now that we're shifting towards 24 and we're heading towards a quote, I don't know if I can say the word normal, but a quote more normal, like some stability in the economy, B2B, B2C, some changes that are happening right now that you're seeing. What are the shifts in terms of the wind for headwinds and tailwinds for startups in this ecosystem?
Yeah, well, the fundraising climate is totally different. I read recently that 38% of all VCs disappeared last year, just
Oh, wow.
gone. The conversations with investors are totally different. I won't repeat everything that's out there. You guys can, you probably know it, but I think there's opportunity in that as well. When the market is super frothy and funding is everywhere, there's FOMO, there's maybe too much investment, and then everybody's like in this growth grind mode, and they forget the fundamentals of really what they need to do sometimes when they're chasing that next thing. And so sometimes, in those frothy markets, you see startups that really shouldn't make it, honestly, or they should be much more lean and validating the idea as they go and being, very purposeful about it versus like grabbing big market share as fast as they possibly can, buying growth. So sometimes in this cooling of the market, you see cooler heads prevail and you start doing the basic building blocks of getting growth and finding your audience. And so, it's a balance, and there can be very painful times then. And unfortunately, a lot of startups won't make it, but hopefully, And that's where I want to do, is really help those brands that are really meant to have an innovation, do things right, so they can see the light of day.
And we'll dive into that. And I think one of the things that I've noticed too, when obviously not being a recap of the market, but just like some nugget takeaways that I understand is that almost bootstrap is back. It's like it's now popular for your startup to be more profitable than it is on expenses, like you alluded to. You're not just growing for growth's sakes, or you're not not overfunded, but like over invested in capital, or your profit margins aren't making sense. That's one of the key things that I've noticed. It's just being lean and more strategic, and just business basics and principles. How does that apply towards your strategy when it comes to go to market and your approach? What are you doing differently that you weren't doing 3 or 4 years ago?
I read an essay by Rob Hardy, and forgetting the title, but it was basically, it's called Non Coercive Marketing. And it's really going back to the fundamentals of aligning your marketing with what your customer truly wants and needs, and not, rather than trying to push them through your funnel and essentially manipulate the customer into doing something that is maybe not right for them at the time. It's actually about trusting yourself and trusting your business, and finding the people who do resonate with your product, and opening up a pathway that they can choose to take. So, in other words, it's about empowering the customer rather than manipulating them. And I think sometimes, going back to sort of the market, when there's all this push, push, growth, grind, there's a pressure to manipulate the customer to meet sort of your playbook of, what the playbook says you had, what number of leads you need in every stage of the funnel in order to get to X number of customers. Marketers have been so metrics driven, which I think metrics are really important, but they're only as important as the fundamental ideas behind that, and the ability to experiment, to say what's going to work for you. How are you going to make your playbook versus following some playbooks that's been proven by somebody else for a different situation?
Especially in the startup land too, when you're still figuring out what that playbook is, and you're testing and trialing and leading with intention. So it sounds more like you're designing just a more intentional customer path
Yeah.
without
And,
just
you know,
feeding metrics.
yeah, I think it's kind of like, go slow to move fast, go slow now to move fast later. Get your
Mm-hmm.
strategy right, test your channels, get the feedback, and sometimes that's hard, right? So you got to figure out, how do I get real feedback, that actually gives me signal to continue doing what I'm doing. And there's just pressure a lot of times for marketers. Like, oftentimes, especially in startups, marketers are hired way too late, because they think, a lot of founders, a lot of business leaders think marketers are there to just, okay, once the product's in place, once the strategy's in place, boom, the marketer's just going to go get customers, or get them in at the top of the funnel. And that's, there's has to be a marketing strategy. Otherwise, it's, some level of throwing spaghetti against the wall. So hire a senior level marketer earlier than you think you need to, is usually the advice, so that you can get to that channel, get the actual execution down. Once sort of tested the strategy, your playbook's not going to happen overnight. You're going to have to try different things. And most of the brands I've worked with are creating definitely new products, if not new categories. And that requires a different level of education and positioning to the customer. Got to both figure out the problem that you're solving while you're solving it, and how to articulate that.
You're like a frontier, and the key thing, I mean, marketing is essentially the voice of the product. Even when you're developing the product and you're positioning the product, you still need marketing to do that. It's two sides of the same hand, in my opinion. As I mean, obviously startups or even small teams, and when we talk about startups, like these are not just like from scratch new ideas. Like, you have an MVP, you're working to scale what's working. Typically, and at least in most of the clients and the teams that I've seen, we're leveraging other teams or fractional teams or agencies, or to fill in part of the playbook, right? So we're building this playbook. Oh, we need an ads agency. Oh, we need part of this social media branding. We need part of this content marketing. Like, whatever it is, you're pulling in different partners. And I've seen, and one of the reasons why I wanted to pick your brain on this is, I've seen teams flourish with the right partners, but it's also how you engage and how you monitor, manage, and build a relationship with those right partners. Because You can have a great partner who has 70 clients and they're doing substantial work with their other clients. And why is this startup or your startup that you're working with an issue? What's the friction point? Is it the offer? Is it the positioning? Is it the communication between both partners? I want to get your mind, like your pick your mind on what have you seen when it comes to taking your brain, your playbook that you've designed, that you're working with, and executing that in reality and leveraging partners to do so.
I think it really positioning is one of the earliest things marketing should do. And that's really not just marketing, it's a partnership, a very close partnership between product and marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And early on when you're hiring your first marketer, that first marketer is going to have to do product marketing, demand, go to market strategy, like a little bit of all these things until you
Mm-hmm.
start specializing. But really going in together, and also sales too, right? Sales, product marketing, to the extent possible, needs to operationalize the feedback from customers. How are you interviewing customers? How are you getting calls from customers who are doing alphas or betas or POCs or whatever, to see not just what they think and feel, but the problems that are they're worth paying for, right? Like what is the job that you're doing for them that is so important that they'll pay money for that, or perhaps in the past they've demonstrated that they have to pay for it, they've tried to buy something to solve this problem. That's giving you real validation of what you're doing that early on. And let's use your first customer presentation, your first call deck, as a good artifact of this process. You need to have a point of view on what does the world look like now based on what you know from customers. Wrong, what's the problem they experience today? What would the perfect world look like, and how do you solve it? Now, that's not my like creative thinking. I have to credit April Dunford. She's an incredible product marketer that I follow, and so getting a lot of points from her. She's a great resource for this. But you need to be able to define that before you can really create messaging and brand and all that stuff.
I think that's pivotal. And I mean, again, it's the entire business, product, sales, and marketing working together to identify what's changed in their world and what are they voting with their dollars, and why are we, like, what are we doing that is worth them voting for us versus a competitor. To get back to like your framing and your approach, like you mentioned earlier, that as you're deploying this strategy, as you're executing the go-to-market strategy, you're bringing on different partners for agency work or whatever needs to be done. There's a lot of different services that you can get for agency work, but I also see that as we're starting to execute, the product can be great, the marketing strategy can be great, but it's only as good as the execution. And part of that execution is how you lead yourself, how you lead the team, but also how you work with your partners. And that to me is a huge hang up, either for me being on both sides of the agencies and also managing agencies, like managing expectations, hitting the ground running, getting results. Like, I want to get your brain, like, how are you making this work holistically, still focusing that you're a frugal startup, you got to make what you got work.
Yeah, I think if you're hiring an agency, you have to think about it almost like a marriage. It is not you threw a job over the fence and they're going to give you back a deliverable. That's it. Because if you're doing startup work or really any kind of super consequential marketing brand work, that work is central to who you are and how you're presenting yourself to the customer in some way. So there has to be a really thorough alignment on those aspects of your company. You have to feed them information and you have to treat them like a partner, because they're an extension of your team. They are creating the voice for your company. So kind of just saying, we want XYZ, give that back to us in 2 weeks, we'll review it and then tell you if we like it or don't like it, is not a great it's not going to create a great product. There are a lot of good agencies out there. If the relationship is lacking, they're not going to be able to give you their best work, right? And it's a big secret of agencies that the best talent wants to work for the best clients. So if you're a great client, you're going to attract better talent as well.
Interesting. You mentioned something that I thought was interesting of having the agency like not wagging the dog. If I have to tell my agency, I want you to do this and I want you to do this and I want you to, is it really, did I hire a fractional part-time worker or did I hire an agency? So obviously the vetting and the dating, what is your, I don't know, like, what are you doing that's working right now for you and your agency partners that is a radical competitive advantage versus the other person who is working with agencies and they're not bearing all the fruit that they could from their agencies, or there's friction in the relationship, or they're dragging their feet, or they're holding on to the next month because they ran out of hours or whatever. What are you doing differently?
Yeah, I think it starts really from the get go of from your agency search through onboarding your agency to your agency management. So, first of all, when you're doing your agency search, you kind of have to say, what are the key things that, what are my needs, right? What are my objectives? Are those realistic for an agency to do? Do I have all the information to give them to be successful to do that? And, do you need a strategist or do you need a creative agency? How much input do you want? Usually, if I'm hiring an agency, unless it's really more of a freelancer or somebody who I want to do like a specific task that already has, a playbook around it, I'm hiring them for their expertise. So you need to let them give you their expertise, but you have to give them all the, you need a brief. You need a brief that talks about what you're trying to do, why, who's the customer, what are your insights to date, and get their feedback on it. And it really needs sort of a two-way conversation. They also need clarity on how you're making decisions. So how you're making decisions to hire the agency, what success looks like to you, and talk that through with them. And, is this realistic? Are these expectations realistic? But when I go through an agency search project, I'm not trying to do a big gotcha moment. I'm trying to tell them exactly what I'm trying to do. I'll tell them, here's what the process looks like. We'll give you a brief. And if you're asking them their feedback or give you a portfolio, you should say what you want to see in that portfolio. Let them give you their best work so you can see what great looks like to them. And then you really can compare agencies apples to apples. And I would normally look at a few, like three, and I try to look for ones that are known for whatever that I'm trying to work on. And people can, you can research that online, and it's important to do all that legwork up front, because the more effort that you put into that, the better the result's going to be. And you're going to save time in the long run because you don't want to redo this whole thing. Starting a new agency relationship is a big setback.
Especially if you're like 3 or 4, 6 months into the game. I think the most insightful piece that you mentioned was not just what do I need, but identifying, do I need a doer and someone who's exceptional at their doing? Do I need a thinker, someone who's exceptional, can create new ideas with me because we haven't actually discovered this part of the strategy yet? Or do I need someone to take what I have and expand it like a creative? Take this idea or this campaign that I have and just bring it to life in a new way that's relevant to the marketplace. What did I miss there? So there's the doer, the thinker, the expander, the one who takes like
And
the
there's,
creative
yeah, I
agency.
mean, I guess sort of in the doer bucket, it's, yeah, just production, whether that's creative production or ad production, and they're working with. But if you're doing that, you should probably already have a brand book, already have a message matrix, really understand. And then, maybe they're a specialist in online advertising, for example, and they tell you what your online ad strategy should be. There's still, even then, there's still some strategy in there. It's more like the executional strategy. So yeah, just be very clear about what you're looking for.
This is like a perfect buyer's guide because I've been on both ends of this spectrum, and really, I haven't seen any agency educate me how to vet and hire an agency so that we can create a win. So it's identifying what do I actually need from the client side. If I'm the client and I'm hiring the agency, what are some of the assets? You mentioned the brand playbook, the messaging framework. What are some of the assets that I need to come prepared so that I don't have to hope that they ask me on onboarding? Because some might, some won't. But what are some of the assets that I should have prepared, documents or strategies or ideas that'll empower them so that we can skip a lot of the nonsense for 14 days?
Yeah, I think, how do you operationalize campaign development?
Hmm.
So, how does, within your company, how do you go from having an idea for a campaign going through all the way to launch and measurement and all that stuff. So, and I've done this for larger companies where you really have to say, okay, step one, maybe it begins in your annual planning process or quarterly or whatever. And then you talk about like, okay, first the person responsible, who's responsible, just starting off, what are the roles and responsibilities in a campaign? And that varies greatly depending on the size of your organization. Like a small organization, it might be one person. In a larger organization, there might be 10 plus people involved, from strategy to production and trafficking. And you might have other agencies in there as well. So kind of need a roadmap from who creates the idea, who writes the brief, putting together a campaign briefing document, and then everything all the way to measuring the success of what do you do, like who iterates on when you're changing things up, and how all the people work together. I think that's really important for an agency to understand. And that's where deadlines get missed, right?
Hmm.
It's because, especially if you're a larger organization and there's a lot of people involved, everybody has to get things in a timely manner. So if you
Back
have,
and forth. Yeah.
yeah, if you've got 12 different steps in your campaign process, any one of those one day late just trips off a downfall. So when they see that, they look at their own processes and marry the two together to make sure, like, just basically total transparency. But that transparency requires thoughtful preparation, because sometimes you don't think through things on your side. Oh yeah, you sort of a, this is how we've always done it, but the agency, imagine they're just an alien coming from Mars. They don't know how you do things. So make sure that, and you should know how they do things as well. And I would ask the agency for, like, what's your standard turnaround time for, this kind of thing, for example. And sometimes an agency is waiting for you to tell them. So for example, like, if you want to see 3 creative directions for a campaign theme and you have a bunch of stakeholders, it's really helpful to walk them through what does that look like. So I always kind of guide people on how to give agencies good feedback, because that feedback completely determines the quality of the creative, or really any kind of project that they're working on.
It's almost like an additional employee. So again, going back to what do you need? A thinker, a doer, an expander. Once you identify what you need, do you have your brand assets, your logo type, whatever you need to have ready in the creative run? But most importantly, do you have a process documented internally? How do you do things internally? Who needs to be involved? What's the time frame for that, documented in a simple way? And then, and I think this is the golden one, and I sometimes suck at these when I give it to agencies, is a brief template. You can write amazing briefs, you can write horrible briefs, and I've been on the end of both giving. So I know I can do, if you're an agency that I work with, I can do better briefs for you, and I admit that. But I think that's an important piece too to the puzzle. It's a lot of administrative work, but I think, speaking from your experience and my experience, this is a lot of legwork up front, but the speed at which you can implement and execute moving forward, I've seen things work radically quick, like super fast. It's even more enjoyable from your end. Like, how doing a lot of work here, what are some of the benefits that you're seeing on your end?
Oh, absolutely. Just they get you. And when I say an agency relationship is like a marriage, it's because I think that you should begin the relationship with vows, whether you want to call them that or not. But you need to tell them what they can expect from you, and they need to tell you what you can expect from them. So I always tell my agencies, what you can expect from me is a brief for every project, big or small. You can expect that you will have a Q&A session to dive deeper into any questions you have. You will expect that I will be the one on my side gathering all the opinions and everything from people, and I'm going to be transparent with that feedback with you. I'm going to have an open kimono because I want us both to be successful. If you're hiring and managing an agency, your job is really just as much to make them successful as their job is. Because if you're just churning through agencies, that's on you. And then you can then talk about what you expect from them, right? You expect them to really put their best talent. You expect them to take your specific feedback, and work on those things. You expect them to disagree with you, if, openly, if they have a different point of view, but then if you've chosen a direction and you want to move forward, sort of disagree and commit, and that's fine. And, maybe a certain level of feedback, a certain level, a speed of feedback, or if there's going to be a delay that they warn you about, you kind of work through all these things that are the most common problems in agency relationships before they happen.
Sometimes I've caught myself not knowing the expectation that I expected of them, and then coming through that expectation like maybe 60 days later. Oh, I thought this was common. I thought this was something that we agreed on, even though it wasn't really agreed on initially. And I want to run through that framework here with you and get your thoughts on it. And I think the three variables of expectations are going to be around communication, which you nailed. The second, I think, is about reporting, if they are doing any kind of reporting. And then the third is about action and how they execute action and how they, like, their timelines for action. Outside of those three variables, is there any other variable that you hone in on to make sure that, because if the listener now, if they're hiring in their agency, they don't know what they don't know. What other variables should they hold to expectations when working with that agency? So we talked about reporting, communication, action. What's another variable that you hone in on?
I would say, like, how people on both sides take things up and down the line. So one of my probably more common frustrations with agencies is that your account rep or your account manager is often mostly just a project communicator manager. They're not really doing something for the campaign. So that's fine when that person is empowered. My frustration is when that person is just a bottleneck for me to get information from someone higher up or someone who's more involved in the project. So I like to really try to figure out what that role is up front. And that is like the conversation I have. It's great to have when you're in the agency search, because you can then indicate that this is important to me, and start it off from the right foot is much easier than waiting till there's a problem and then complaining about it. And you don't want to like complain about a specific person if it's not really their fault. It's just sort of how the agency is set up. And agencies have to bill for things to make their own overhead, right? So they might make a different account decision if you sort of want that faster link to the strategist, for say, for example, versus if maybe you don't need that, if they're more executional, then you can get somebody more junior on the account.
I think that's important too, but it also shows you the makeup and the intention from the agency themselves too. Like how, I'm not to say that every agency that doesn't do this isn't in alignment with results, but like really how much do results matter to you, and how willing are you as an agency, speaking to the agency's front, to really put your best foot forward and empower your people to work directly with the clients, without putting these fake walls or barriers that sometimes just create frustration. It's sometimes a waste of time, to be honest with you.
Yeah, sometimes, agencies, they see a small company and then it's kind of like, oh, you're going to get the junior players. And that's a frustration. And actually, when you're in a David brand situation, you really need the top quality players because you're doing something really different. You're not copying something. So sometimes that's a conversation about like, is this really a match? Number one. And then number two, like maybe we need to pay for that, right? But let's figure that out up front rather than, just getting kind of like the junior talent and then again cycling through another agency, which is more expensive.
Point of contact, that's key. We'll put that in the framework. You're learning, you mentioned that this framework that you're sharing with us today, like you learned from a very special person. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I was working at a larger company, and we became ANA members, which is the Association of National Advertisers, and they have great training on agency management and creative development. And through that, I was able to have some workshops with Jane Moss. She was the first female creative director at Ogilvy, most likely the inspiration for the Peggy character on Mad Men. And she wrote a book called Mad Women. But she was such a hoot. She was, big advertising in the 60s and 70s and really just pushed her way through. And she had some just incredible advice, both in marketing excellence and creative excellence, as well as being a woman coming up through that era in marketing. And you'd think she would talk about how hard it was, but she really mostly talked about how fun it was.
It's
She
really
had some
cool.
excellent advice on what really makes good marketing stand the test of time.
And kind of like our conversation today here, marketing as a discipline, and like a lot of the things that we focused here were in the creative or the strategy, mostly about the discipline to adhere to a principle of how are we going to execute marketing. And I think that's one of the key things across all skill sets, but most importantly for something as important as growth. I mean, everything under growth is sales and marketing of the product, like tied together. Um, but the discipline that it takes to really thrive as a team, to thrive in your career and thrive working with others. Tracey, I really appreciate you sharing this framework with us today. For everyone listening, where's the best place for people to, one, connect with you, see what you're up to, and to thank you?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn / Tracey Saenz, Saenz, and happy to engage with people. And I think we can all support each other as a community, whether you're in startups or big co's. Marketing's always a fun and challenge. And I'd love to hear from people and support people wherever I can.
I'll put that link in the show notes. Tracey, thanks again for being on.
Thank you so much. Great talking to you, Raul.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.